we're just gonna be talking about a couple things here. But I have my friend here, Mike from Go Cell Phone Repair. I'm gonna go ahead and bring him in. So go ahead and say hi, Mike. How's it going?
Hey, Luke, doing good. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks for coming, being on the
Hey,
stream.
thanks for inviting me.
Yeah,
We're covering coast to coast right now, so.
definitely. I know. So on opposite sides of the country, but yeah. So Mike has a channel on here. I'm just gonna go ahead and throw it up here. He's got a channel called Go Cell Phone Repair, and I have way too many monitors to know what I'm doing. But here we go. This is Go Cell Phone Repair's channel, and he does live streams on Monday and Thursday. And he's on the West Coast, so that is Pacific time if you're interested. But he's got a ton of awesome content, always staying up to date on the latest tech news, and it's just really cool. I just did a live stream with him about a week ago. You can see us there. So yeah, it's a great to have you here, man. We're gonna talk about tons of different stuff, but yeah. So we'll give a couple minutes just to have people join and get settled in here. But as the title suggests, we're going to be talking about WWDC 2018 because we are Apple fans, of course, and that's what we're all about. We're also going to talk about some YouTube changes and some other tech news that's been going around, some AI, as we were just talking about a couple minutes ago. But yeah, we'll always have time for Q&A. If you have any questions, just drop a question in the chat and we'll definitely get around to it. Yeah, first off, let's just jump into WWDC. For those of you who don't know, that's Apple's developer conference every summer. So they run for about a week, but they start off the week with a keynote. Usually that's on Monday. So that's just 2 days away. And they'll usually announce all the latest tech and updates that they're bringing to their products. So usually it has a focus on software, and we're going to get into kind of some specifics of our predictions and maybe what we want to see. So, but yeah, so for you, Mike, what are your thoughts on WWDC? I know you're not specific to Apple products or anything like that, but do you have any thoughts going into this event?
Most of what I work on phones
Right.
40 hours a week. So a lot of what comes out of these new conferences, whether it's WWDC or CES or, any other thing, Mobile World Congress, is, okay, what are our new challenges going to be?
Yeah.
For the next phone that comes out, when people drop them and they break or they get wet or they need a new battery, what are we looking at? Are they changing the designs? Do we need to start looking at how this new form factor is going to be, more difficult or impossible to service? So from the hardware side of it, the only thing that we've really heard rumors about at this point is that they seem to be experiencing some light leakage problems on the next generation of the iPhone 10, whatever that may be called. So, the first thing that goes off within our community is, okay, if Apple is already kind of struggling with a certain part of the hardware on this new device, that means that when it eventually comes in to be repaired, it's probably going to be another concern for us.
Right.
Outside of that, looking at the software, which is, as you mentioned, that's kind of what they focus on for these things. It sounds like they're going to be hopefully kind of bringing Siri to the next level, because that's something we'd really like to see is a more functional Siri that does what we tell it to when we say so. And of course, some changes to whether it's going to be iOS 12, whether we get to actually see what that's going to be like or not, and hopefully fixing a few issues that we had with some of the handsets for the iOS 11 version. But beyond that, the big thing that I keep hearing about is how they're going to try to sort of help smartphone addicted people get off their smartphones. And that's my big question, is how do you go about doing that? If you build something in, like they're talking about a monitor that's built into the phone that kind of reminds you how much time you've spent, right, in app or on phone or whatever. And my question is that going to be enough to really, do we have a problem, first of all, because people are spending that much time on their devices? And secondly, will reminding them of how long they've been using it really have a big effect? That's the one that's hard to predict, I guess. So those are my thoughts, is, how is Apple going to package this thing that says, hey, you've been on Snapchat for X amount of hours today, and do it in a way that doesn't make you go, you know what, I don't want to see this notification anymore. Just get rid of it.
Right.
And will that really alter people's behavior? I mean, that remains to be seen, right?
Definitely. And I mean, just as we were talking earlier, we always talk about everything we want to say right before, and then we end up just should have just started recording at 12. But yeah, we were just saying that it's not really the company's job to manage how you control your usage on these devices. That should really be up to you. And again, they can bring some features that can help you with that, but it's more of it really is up to you at the end of the day. But I think with a lot of the software changes, it's a lot of just like subtle improvements over the years, and then every 5, maybe 7, 10 years even, we have a huge spike. And I feel like the last big spike for software, at least, was when we went to iOS 7. They completely revamped the entire design from a more of a 3D look and all that stuff to being more flat and modern looking. And then ever since then, we've had these kind of subtle improvements ever since. But yeah, I mean, it's always interesting to see what they're going to bring. And it's someone just brought in a question about the SE2. I don't know if you've seen anything about that, but basically it's, I don't know if you know the iPhone SE, but it's kind of brought back the iPhone 4 design with a more cube square shape, but it's more affordable usually. But the SE2 is set to have a notch. It's supposed to be a little bit cheaper. I don't know if you've read anything about that, but
I, I have a few things, and one thing we like about the SE is that it doesn't bend. I mean, it is a
yeah,
durable phone. So if you're
for sure.
looking for something that fits in the palm of your hand, certainly a good option. Sometimes if you hold these up too long and you literally get like hand fatigue, it's like,
Yeah.
okay, and then I need to use both hands on it. So for that reason, I like the SE design. Obviously better processor than the iPhone 5S, but very similar form factor.
Yeah.
As far as the SE2 goes, what we do know for sure is that it is not easy to properly cut a notch into an LCD. So we're thinking, maybe that Apple will be leaning towards an OLED display rather than the LCD for the SE2. Now that's questionable. Don't know for sure. They've also kind of teased a glass back, which of course would allow for wireless charging, which apparently I'm the only proponent of, because I love my wireless charging, and
I
everybody
think
goes,
it's
who
great.
cares? It's too much of a pain. So, which I think is healthier for your battery. It's a bad idea to run a lithium ion battery all the way down, and it's bad to keep it plugged in after it's at 100%. So for me, I just sit down, phone's on the charger. When I get up and walk away, it's not anymore. And topping up is actually a good thing. And I know I've gotten far away from the original question, which
No, you're
was
good.
asked about the SE2 price. Man, anybody's guess. I strongly suspect, though, that we'll see at least a slight reduction across the board for all of the iPhones that end up showing up this year, whether it's in September or November, because there is also a lot of talk about delay for the next generation of iPhone 10
Right.
because of that light leakage problem, which I would assume Apple will have ready in time for Christmas, but it sounds like it might not hit the normal, the yearly September schedule like they expected it to. But who knows? They could pull anything out. As far as the price on the SE2, again, I would expect it to be, I don't know, maybe $100 less than the original SE, because we've really seen that every manufacturer has kind of reached that saturation point in the market where it's like, hey, now I need a real incentive to upgrade, right? Like, why do I need to get another phone this year unless it's just incredibly dramatically different and brings so much to the table that I've got to upgrade? I think we're kind of falling into that 2-year time frame now. So one way to incentivize your customers would be like, hey, we're going to make it easier for you to upgrade this year. And I would
Right.
expect that to happen. That's my
Definitely.
prediction.
And one thing too to consider is that when you do bring in these new products like the SE2, it does mean, even though if it is going to be cheaper, that the SE, the first edition, and other phones, even like the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus, they're going to go down in price. And usually that means $100 reduction, or sometimes even more. If it was going to be, 200 or something with a plan or something, it can go down to being free with a certain cell companies. So that's another thing to consider, is that maybe while the new model may be a little bit better, it does mean that the current models out now are going to be cheaper and more available. So, because a lot of people are early adopters, so they like to be the first to be getting there and get that new model. So they're trying to sell what they have currently, and that might even be an iPhone 10. Whatever comes up next. But like you mentioned, there has been some delay with the phones, and so usually those products like Mac and iPhones have their own events in September, October, and November around the end of the year. But yeah, it's always interesting to see what they do. And in terms of the notch, I have an iPhone 8 Plus, so I don't have a notch in my screen, but I don't actually mind it. I've seen and I've played with the iPhone 10 a lot, and I don't actually mind it at all. I feel like it can disappear pretty quick, and the way that a lot of apps are integrating it into their software, with the menu bar, they're going across both sides. I know there is a lot of bugs originally, but that's just with all new software, you're going to have that. So I don't mind the notch, but yeah, I hope that answers your question. So in terms of Mac events, I mean, usually this is a software event, so we're likely to see a lot of new updates to Mac and iOS, but nothing too much on the MacBook and Mac desktops. But I think it'd be really nice to see some improvements. I think there's been a huge gap in the lower end of Macs. I think they did a great job of upgrading to that 12-inch MacBook, but when they built that, they also kind of got rid of the need for a MacBook Air. So now the Airs are kind of just floating around in the market, and some people kind of need it, but if they're going to pay for that, they might as well just get the 12-inch. So on the portable laptop side, I think there could be some improvement on the lower end, but also for the desktop side, the Mac Mini has been very much in need of an upgrade. And I originally had a Mac Mini when I first started the channel, and it was great while it lasted, and it did what I needed to do. But ever since then, there hasn't been a huge change really. And in the newer models, you can't swap out hard drives and stuff like that. So what are
Mm.
your thoughts on maybe a modular desktop like the Mac Mini or something a little bit more portable in that case?
Yeah, I think that it's safe to say that anyone who does phone, computer, tablet service and repair would absolutely love to see something with a more modular design.
Mm-hmm.
And even as a user, if you think back a few years ago, you built your computer if you happen to be using Windows at some point, okay? And I know probably a lot of us use both. Some of us are exclusively one or the other. In my line of work, I kind of have to have both of them. And one of the things that I'd really like to see, and I'm not going to hold my breath, but if there was more modularity to where, hey, I want to, you can do a few upgrades here and there. You can change out your solid state drive. You can change out, that's not a whole lot else, right? Unless you really dig in there. And that's one of the things where, when we look at computers versus phones and tablets, not too many people going out and buying a brand new computer every year, right? Especially if you're investing in something that's made by Apple. They're designed to last several years, and they're a pretty significant upfront investment. So it would be awesome if, hey, if you want to add RAM, you can. If you want a bigger hard drive, you can do that. Again, I'm not going to hold my breath, because one of the things that makes Apple products work for the most part is they're all put in a package. They're designed to work together. They send them out as is. You don't have to take them apart, or you're not supposed to have to change anything on the inside. So while it would be nice, I don't expect that to happen. I've been wrong before.
Yeah.
But certainly, please don't solder the hard drive into the logic board, because that
Please,
makes
I
it
know.
almost impossible to change it out. And that's one thing that, if you want to say, hey, you should see an authorized service center or someone who has a lot of hands-on experience who can then service it, I understand that. But to make it difficult for even that person or the company itself, you don't. It doesn't seem like that would be in your best interest. We want to be able to upgrade.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know if you've ever tried to swap out a hard drive. I mean, I'm sure you have because you work in that industry, but on an iMac, for example, taking out that hard drive is a really big process, and you have to get special gear to take the glass off. I mean, it's like an hour or two long process. I've done it, I think, on my dad's iMac. We swapped out the hard drive for an SD, and it was a really long process. You got to be really careful, know exactly what you're doing. But it would be nice to see some more modular design. And again, if that means waiting a couple more months, that's all right. But it would be nice to just have some more updates and kind of see where we are on that, because they announced the modular Mac Pro, or excuse me, the Mac Pro, the trash can one, about a year ago now, probably more, a year and a half. And we haven't seen too much on that front. They've just kind of said 2018, 2019,
Hmm.
not really sure. And it would be nice because I think there's a missing market. Like you're saying, people are buying Macs for a long duration. And if that means spending more upfront so that they can have a modular design, so that they can upgrade it and add a little bit more life, I think people would be willing to invest in that. But yeah, I would definitely like to see some Mac Pro updates on that. But yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
what
go ahead.
I was just going to say, what you said about the MacBook Air is
Mm,
kind of sad. I love that
yeah,
laptop. I love the design. It's so lightweight, and even if it's just kind of your spare machine that, hey, if I don't want to carry something heavy, I can. It's this thin. I
no,
love that computer.
I know, and that was my very first Mac. I'm pretty sure. Like I had the little 11-inch, and it was so portable. I could throw that in any bag that I had, and it was so thin. It's just a joy to edit. I mean, and I even edited with Final Cut on it. So even if you got something like 8 gigs of RAM on that, and just maybe 256 or 512 on a used MacBook Air, like you could have that for a couple years. But it would be nice to see some improvements, maybe like a better graphics card or some maybe a better display or an updated keyboard, those little things that could add some life. But I'm interested to see what they do now because they've kind of got this clash between the MacBook Air and then the 12-inch MacBook.
Mhm.
So it's interesting to see
Yeah,
what
well,
they do.
and at a certain point, you're cannibalizing your own product,
Exactly.
right? So yeah, pick one or the other, I guess. Too
Right.
bad. Well, I'll say it sold me on using Apple, and I have to give credit. Final Cut Pro did also, because when we talk about
Mm,
YouTube stuff, it's just leaps and bounds beyond what you get with something like Windows Movie Maker or
right.
anything really basic. But really, honestly, iMovie. If you were using just iMovie and you set that against Windows Movie Maker or any other just really basic editing,
Yeah.
it's got a lot to it. And that's what I love about my Apple products is when it comes to multimedia, they do really well, which for people like us is important.
For sure. Well, I think that kind of segues into our next section, which is AI. And we kind of mentioned Siri a little bit, but we can start with Siri. What are your thoughts on Siri's need for improvement? We have definitely been lacking in some features, and Google has been making some major headway with Google Home and Assistant recently at Google I/O. I know you actually mentioned you talked about this a few weeks ago on your stream. So, what are your thoughts on kind of the AI world and assistants?
Yeah. Well, I kind of wonder. First of all, when Siri was released initially, it seemed like maybe it was slightly premature.
Mm,
Now, at the same time, to be first is a good thing, right? So if you have a voice assistant in your product, that's a big feature, and that's kind of there's a lot of build up to that. And obviously, all of this technology still has a ways to go, and it's only a matter of time. And we tend to see when someone makes a huge advance, eventually everyone does. So after seeing the Google I/O phone call, which we talked about earlier, which is
yeah,
just like, wow, this is
crazy.
just freaky and a glimpse into like how sophisticated this is going to become, and if it hasn't already, and there was kind of like, well, was that really legit? And I couldn't see Google making that up and faking it,
Right.
right? So knowing that that's what's available now, a year or two in the future, it's going to be just beyond belief. Siri, I expect to see huge improvements in Siri, hopefully with iOS 12. At the same time, I'm not sure if Apple might be focusing on other things like augmented reality and taking Face ID a little bit further. So you can only put so much emphasis into one area before you start splitting your resources up. So I don't know how much is going to go into Siri. It would certainly be nice to see some improvements there. Um, Personally, I don't use Siri, but that's a personal preference. I'm not a voice assistant person, so I try to keep up to date on what's going on with it. It's still a little too weird for me to talk to a machine, so
Sure.
maybe that'll happen in the future. But I certainly hope that I expect we'll see some improvements on Siri, because that's one area where
I
we
think
can
so.
certainly do to it would make sense to
Right.
bring her kind of up to date, closer to the Alexa, Google Assistant level.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think what we've mentioned in the past is that having these competitors is what kind of drives each other, these other companies, to make improvements. So without Google's improvements on the IO, we wouldn't see improvements in Siri. So hopefully the drastic change and leap that we're seeing with Google I/O or Google Assistant, excuse me, will kind of propel Apple to keep their assistant going. But I don't actually use Siri a ton either, and I think the main reason is just that it doesn't work very well. And I think in the past, like I've tried using it like consistently, and she's just inconsistent, I think, is the thing. And it's just difficult to work with that when you actually aren't saving time, because that's the whole point of the assistant, is to save you
Right.
time to maybe send a text, set a reminder, or whatever it is. And when you ask her to do that and then she completely doesn't understand what you're saying, then that's not really helpful. But I'm interested to see what happens with that, for sure. But yeah, I think Apple is kind of just, they focus on one thing at a time, and we get it in waves. We might see a huge jump with Macs, and then we'll focus on iPads, and that's kind of the whole iPad Pro we saw recently, and then we saw iPhones. But I think recently we've been seeing a lot of, you mentioned augmented reality. They've been definitely featuring some VR stuff with, even at the educational event. I'm not sure if you watched that, but I think it's a great tool for kind of any industry, because especially for gamers, obviously that's a huge thing. But in the educational world, that's super helpful to be using and to kind of teach students. I'm assuming. I mean, I never had it in my classes, but it would have been really nice to have.
Oh,
I can
yeah.
see.
And there's a question in a chat about the iOS 12 leak,
Right.
and on that topic, it does sound like we will most likely see some big announcement about augmented or virtual reality with iOS 12, and they had kind of talked about bringing gaming to become interactive. So in other words, you're using VR, so is the other person in the game, and you two can interact together. So that's one of the
Right.
things that we may see announced next week, which will be interesting.
Yeah. And I think what these past few models have been building up to, just in the iPhone 10, the iPhone 8 Plus, is kind of building the hardware to support that, and kind of going over the air, so you could maybe stream with someone playing that VR, which would be really interesting to see. So, in terms of the 12 leak, yeah, I would be very excited to see what's going to happen in a couple days, where they go with it. But again, it is the developers conference, so we're going to see a lot of announcements, but it's usually just available for developers, and it'll kind of hit the market in 3 to 6 months and kind of become mainstream a little bit later. So but it's nice to hear an update on kind of hear where we stand. But yeah, so if do you have any more thoughts on that WWDC event before we kind of move on, or do you?
Oh, not really. The main thing obviously it sounds like a lot of what we're going to hear about is going to be software,
Right.
and that's not a huge surprise. iOS 12, we could um, certainly be happy to see a refresh on iOS. That in my market, that's been challenging. iOS 11 has had its share of bugs. Probably standing out, I think, amongst all of the iOS versions we've seen so
Yeah.
far, as being the one which changed the operating system, dramatically changed the design of the phone, all these new features. There's a lot of things to work out, and we really expect iOS 12 to kind of answer all those problems, and
Right.
hopefully make them less of a concern. As you mentioned with Siri, real quick before we move on, I did want to
Sure.
kind of run this by you. One thing that I've noticed about Siri, okay Google, whatever it is that you happen to be using, and I really question, is how much of this is the processing or the information side of that mechanism, and how much of it has to do with sound quality and just being able to
Hmm.
understand what people are saying. Because if I'm on the road, which is the one main place that I would want to use a voice assistant, because I
Right.
don't want to take my hands off the wheel and try to, obviously I'm not going to text and drive, but if I can say, hey Siri, send a text message to such and such person, well, I'm also on the road, so there's a lot of background noise. My hands-free mic is way
Yeah.
up here, and you say it 3 or 4 times and then you just give up.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's necessarily a limitation of the software as much as it is of the audio quality
The
that you're able
hardware.
to
Yeah.
get from your voice over to the phone. So we need to see a big breakthrough where we're not at the level of the human ability to differentiate and filter out the background noise and really understand what someone's saying, as we need to be, you know, to make that work. And I think that's one of the challenges that we're really seeing with any of these voice assistants in general. On top of that, if I ever say seriously, suddenly I'm I'm dictating my entire conversation from that point on, and I didn't notice it. So I think that maybe Siri is not the best name for a voice assistant, you know, not the best cue to have a voice assistant start recording. And who knows?
That's
Hopefully
a really good, it's a good point that you raised though, because I've been driving too, and obviously you don't want to take your hands off the wheel, but maybe if you're listening to music or something, you have to now list that mic has to pick up you saying that cue over that music or the radio or
right.
whatever is happening, or maybe you've got people talking in the car. And so that's a really good point. I think there definitely needs to be an upgrade on the hardware. And of course it is difficult to make a pretty powerful mic in a small body like that. But I think it is a pretty big balance between, you know, the hardware components of that and then just the software being able to hear that cue. But yeah, I have had quite a few mishaps with the cue, and probably the worst being in class, probably sophomore year of high school. I had it in my bag and my teacher said something like Syria in history or whatever. And it went on, but then it just recorded for like maybe 40 or 50 seconds worth.
Right.
And then it stopped and read back his entire lecture for like the past 40 seconds
Oh, wow.
in the entire class. So there definitely, and of course my phone should have been off, but you know, there definitely could be some improvement there. So yeah, I'm excited to see what happens at WWDC. I think there's obviously going to be a lot of software improvements. I'm hoping to see some more improvements on Mac OS. Last year with High Sierra, we saw a lot of very much needed improvements. And I'm not aware, are you on Mac currently, or are you running on Windows?
Yeah, well, on right now, this is Windows.
Sure. Okay.
I do have a Mac, and I do all my publishing on a MacBook.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think because obviously a Mac is my daily driver, I think there is a lot of great improvements from just Sierra, with little things like APFS, Apple's filing system, like copying and pasting things is now so much faster. I would love to see a lot of little improvements like that, where things that you do every day are just made so much easier and sped up, just to save you time. And so we'll see. I mean, you know, there's always something that Apple has up its sleeve. I feel like as much rumors as you can read and different blog sites, it's definitely gotten more accurate over the years. It used to be that, like, you know, nothing leaked from Apple,
Right.
if at all, you know, and nowadays you can usually get the gist of it, but there's always something I'm hoping that you know, they expand on and kind of surprise us with maybe a one more thing at the end of the event. But we'll definitely see in just a couple days. So, but yeah, I mean, I think that the whole assistant conversation kind of also goes on to talking about AI in general, and also you're talking about the whole Tesla AI and autopilot that's been in the news recently. And for those of you who don't know, Tesla's cars do have an autopilot feature. And recently there have been a couple of crashes where Tesla car actually crashed into a police officer's vehicle, but he wasn't in the car. So everyone involved was okay, but the car was totaled, and that got in the news. It got a lot of, you know, viewership and everything. But the reality is that there's going to be some mistakes in AI, but there's also a lot of a lot of mistakes in humans. I mean, we have a lot of human error when we're driving. And so if it means having a couple crashes to build this AI in order to save us from more crashes, I think it's worth it. What are your thoughts on this new, you know, computer and AI advancement in all these different areas? And
get ready for a crazy future, you know, within the near future is just going to be insane. So yeah, as we were talking about right before this, there is a general kind of feeling of skepticism about machines, which, you know, kind of makes sense, because once you kind of hand the reins over to something automatic to take care of it, it's like, I feel a little weird about this. I don't know. I'm not in control anymore. You know, there's a fear there about, I don't have my hands on the wheel. It's something else. And I don't think that those fears are unfounded, but I do believe that when we look at this, we look at things like the media, who will take a single accident and say, look, see, we told you self-driving cars are a hazard. And, you know, obviously they have a ways to go. And if we look at the number of hours that these cars have on the road, and we compare that to a person driving, and that accident rate seems to be that, well, overall the machine is doing it better. You show that to people and they go, yeah, but I still don't feel okay about this. And I quickly say, when you're in an airplane, there is a pilot, but he hasn't got his hands on the wheel all the time. There's so many systems, so many of the things that we take part in daily that are automated, that if we really step back and said, wow, this whole thing's already programmed, there's not much there. There's somebody kind of sitting there. And I do want to mention, and this is something that Tesla, in their defense, has stated more than once, and that is that their autopilot, their mechanism in the car is not designed for you to take your hands off the wheel and watch a movie and sit in the back seat or take a nap or something like that. It's an assistant, and it's not completely automated. So you're supposed to be behind the wheel, keep your hands on there. And of course, when someone knows that the car can do something, they're always going to be tempted to allow it to do, whatever that is. So I don't fault Tesla so much as I do maybe their ability to communicate to people that, no, you do not take your hands off the wheel and turn it over 100% to the machine at this point. On the other hand, with the Uber car that we had, there was someone inside the passenger compartment who was supposed to be keeping track of what's going on. And I believe that one incident that we saw in Arizona was just kind of an exception to the rule. Odd lighting, someone jumped out in the car, stepped out in front of the car. It didn't have a lot of time. I'm not sure a human would have reacted in time. But the big problem with that was that the car apparently never engaged the brakes at any point in time, even when it was alerted of something being in its path. So that's a problem. But it's not like we have self-driving cars that are just smashing into things left and right every day. So the technology is getting there. Obviously, it's going to be a matter of time. But I think the bottom line is it is going to happen. It is inevitable, whether we like it or not. And my one thing that I like to bring up to people when they worry about self-driving cars not being safe, the first thing that comes to mind for me is, I got to tell you, I'm not happy with a lot of the other cars on the road. The people in those cars who we have no control over, we've got to trust to be doing the right thing. I believe that their skills could be improved, So no matter whether someone else's car is self-driving or not, I'm always kind of looking out for the other person and making sure that they're not trailing too close behind me or doing something funny in front of me. Or if I got a blind intersection, I'm not just going to blow through it because I have a green light, because you're really trusting that the other person who comes to that intersection is going to stop at the stop sign. And obviously that doesn't happen all the time. So
yeah, definitely. And I can tell you from driving in Atlanta, where we have a lot of horrible drivers, that is definitely the case, where you're putting your trust in a lot of people who probably don't have a lot of experience, and you don't, or at least you just don't know how much experience they have. And at any point that accident could happen. And like you mentioned, I mean, I feel like they do get a lot of press whenever any kind of autopilot or anything like that has an accident, but yet you don't see all the prevented accidents that car has saved. And there was even a case that I think Elon Musk actually retweeted about a guy who was driving in the Tesla who switched on autopilot but had fallen asleep, and it actually woke him up to remind him, and it basically saved his life. I mean, long short of it. And so that, like, you don't see a lot of those stories. So we don't know how many accidents it's prevented, and in the long run, how many accidents it can prevent with more vehicles like this. But it's an interesting world for sure. And I think it's also new as well, that it's just going to take time for people to adjust. And, if people are against it, they're against it. But in my opinion, I'm definitely for the idea if in the long term, it's going to help save lives and improve driving on the road and being more safe.
If we could get to a point in time where you can be more productive when you're commuting, people who aren't in the right condition to drive can get in their car and the car will take them where they need to go without having them, swerving all over the road. I am 100% in favor of that, like you said. And really, I don't think it matters, what we think, because it's coming one way or another. It's going to happen. And the odd thing is that the media is so focused on sensationalism that, you know, as you mentioned, we don't see all of these success stories about how technology did this great thing for people. It's always, ooh, no, the future, I'm scared, this car crashed, look, see, we told you. Kind of along the same way, and I don't mean to politicize this by any means, but if you look at anything, take a look at something like police brutality, where that you don't see videos of police officers doing their jobs and helping people and being the heroes. You see all of the negative events that took place. Look at that, you know, we told you they're doing the wrong thing. And this is throughout any industry. It's always, let's see what the bad part of this is and not the good things that it does, because people really get tired of seeing good news, right? People want to see, oh, this is outrageous, I can't believe this is terrible, we need to bring this into the, you know, into the public spotlight, whereas everything's good, everybody's happy, you're doing a great job, and not interesting. It's not news, right? So there's certainly a bias there in the media for anything.
Definitely. And I think just because there's any kind of technology involved or any kind of new anything that's being pioneered like AI or autopilot, it just kind of gets magnified even more just in the news and stuff. But yeah, and so that's kind of my thoughts on autopilot, and I think it's a great. And I would even venture to say for a lot of those cases, like for autopilot and stuff, how much of that is still user error? Like there's cases like you had mentioned um, where Tesla, it does encourage its users to keep its hands on the wheel, and Tesla keeps a lot of very specific logs on all the data on the crashes and any kind of accidents that if we look back at it, I wouldn't be surprised if it was more user error in that scenario. So at the end of the day, I don't know how much of it is actually their fault, but a lot of it does get publicized and we don't see a lot of the good stuff. So, well, I think the next topic we have on our list is to talk about algorithms, which kind of just keeps segueing into AI and stuff, and more specifically, YouTube algorithms. And recently, YouTube just kind of revealed, somewhat by accident, that they are testing out a non-chronological feed for your subscription box. And this is kind of a new trend in social media apps where we kind of go from a reverse chronological order. So you always see the latest posts in order from newest to oldest. Now we're seeing kind of what the algorithm suggests we should see. And recently, a user tweeted at YouTube, at Team YouTube, I believe, and said, asking just why all of his videos in his subscription feed was out of order. And YouTube replied to him saying that they were already testing out a non-chronological feed. So what are your thoughts on this? I know this is kind of a trend in a lot of social networks recently, but how do you think this will affect YouTubers? How do you think it'll affect you and I as smaller creators in this new world?
Yeah, something like that specifically, I would have to look at as, oh boy, what's a good way to put this? So there are channels that we want to see, chronologically, like we want to see the latest thing that this says, and we want to see the latest thing that this person did. And then on the other hand, there are other topics where we want to see the video that is best suited to our tastes, right? So there's kind of a mixture there, and I think that taking things out of chronological order purposely could be a bad thing if you're looking, it all depends on the viewer, right? So this is something that if I hope that YouTube will come to the conclusion that this change works for some people and not others, and therefore making this uniform across the board would be a terrible idea. If YouTube's main concern is to get more view time, right? They want to give you videos in your feed that you'll be interested in watching. That should ultimately be their goal, because as we know, YouTube doesn't make a whole lot of money, but any money that comes in to pay for all of that storage space comes from advertisers, and advertisers need to get eyes on their product. So for me, there are some videos that I want to see the latest of, which, not having them chronologically is a bad thing for me. And this may be true for you, because anyone who's really focused on tech, more than likely something that came out 6 months ago is so irrelevant at this point that time to move on. So for us, I don't think it's a good thing. I've been seeing things in my feed and I'm going, where my suggested videos, just wondering where this came from. And then that always tells me, okay, YouTube's at it again. They're trying to experiment, and it'll be a matter of time before they somewhat straighten things out. But that's a big question, because it really depends on where you're coming from. If you're interested in getting something the most relevant to your interests, it might be something from a year ago. But for people like us, we need to see what happened yesterday or today. So
I mean, and I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I think it's just kind of redundant, because the whole point of a subscription feed is to see the feed in order. And so you want to see the latest videos to know you're caught up and you're not missing any new uploads. But there is a whole page on the YouTube app and on the YouTube website called Home that is meant for this whole thing already. That a year ago, there may have been a video that applies to you and it might show up as a suggested video. And that's super helpful. I've seen tons of awesome videos that have helped me and discovered new channels and creators that I've ended up subscribing to from that page. But that was on the home page, and there's already that whole feed is designed for that thing, so they don't need to duplicate that and now remove the subscription feed. It doesn't make sense to me. And they have mentioned that they're willing to try and put in an option where you can enable either chronological or whatever, just random, I guess, suggested. But I feel like they're going to default that option to their random suggested version, and a lot of users won't know that that is an option to be enabled, so that they'll just forget about that, and then eventually YouTube's just going to get rid of the subscription feed anyway. So it's weird. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of it, and a lot of apps have done it recently, and it's annoying. Like Facebook have done it, Instagram have done it, Twitter even. And there are some apps that will kind of keep it in reverse chronological order. I use Tweetbot for Twitter because that's just for that reason, because I like to stay up to date with that. But I don't know. I think this could really hurt a lot of smaller creators, because a lot of people just don't know that first of all, they don't know the difference between the home and subscription feed. And so they could just open up their app, think they're on subscription, never see your video, and then you just start losing a lot of views, maybe even subscribers because of that. So those are my personal thoughts on that. I mean, I don't know how much it will actually end up hurting it, but as you mentioned, there are a lot of audiences that YouTube has to serve, because they've got advertisers, they've got creators, and they've got users, just people wanting to enjoy YouTube. And I would venture to say, because they don't, make a lot of money, it would make sense to me to kind of, even if we got rid of ads or just at least reduce the amount of its presence on YouTube, I wouldn't even mind, as a creator, paying toward that, maybe a monthly fee or something, just to have our content stand out more and kind of reduce that ads. And I read that somewhere in some article. What would your thoughts be on potentially helping YouTube in order to get your content to stand out?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I never thought about that. So
No,
that's a
I
new
kind of just
question. Now,
threw you a curveball, but
I have heard, I did go to a YouTube workshop here in the Bay Area a couple years ago, and they did kind of briefly mention that occasionally you might consider sponsoring your own video as an advertisement. So we could take this video, say, and go, okay, I want to spend X amount of dollars and promote this. And those little pre-roll things that you see on other videos. So certainly there's some option for that. Now, as far as standing out, do you mean like maybe you pay YouTube to kind of put you in someone's suggested feed, something like that?
well, there are different, like on the sidebar, there's different places, like the sidebar of a video. Usually there's like a sponsored video, or it says promoted underneath it. So maybe putting your video there, or
Okay.
I think,
Well, if you want to sponsor your own video, I'm pretty sure you can do that and get it into that area. Whether or not it's going to be profitable long term, I don't know, because as we know, if you're monetizing your videos through something like AdSense, you're going to get like $1 for 1,000 views. So it would cost you a lot more than that to get that many views. So I don't know. And at the same time, you raise a good point, because there are quite a few creators out there, especially smaller channels, who have quality content and they don't end up getting into the suggested videos. They don't end up getting found for numerous reasons. So
Mm. I
yeah,
think
that's a good.
what's yeah, I think
It's a good
go
question.
ahead.
I think that I believe that YouTube's idea is that if we do our SEO properly and we create good
Right.
content and we make great thumbnails, then eventually we'll get found. But it's safe to say that if you've got 12 subscribers as opposed to 10,000, you're going to have to do a lot more work to get your video in front of people. So
I think what's tough though is just as you mentioned, is that what's becoming more of a trend now with these social networks is that you produce the content and that content is becoming a lot less of the work involved to stand out. It used to be, you upload your content and that was really 90% of the work, maybe 95, and you could do a little bit of tags and SEO here and there, but now it's way more about SEO and marketing. And now these creators and just people on these social networks are having to learn more marketing skills. I think that's what's frustrating for me because I don't love a lot of the marketing and SEO side of it. I much prefer just producing the content, as I'm sure the case is for a lot of creators. But we don't want to have to learn all these other skills, maybe graphic design for thumbnails or marketing and SEO and blog writing and website development just to get our content to stand out. I think that might be frustrating, but yeah,
absolutely. I would say that it's also frustrating as a viewer, as a follower, as someone who's watching these other things, because one thing that we saw with Google as it has evolved as a search engine is that initially it was super, super easy to game Google. You go in and you throw a bunch of tags inside or you build a bunch of content with the same word over and over on your website, and suddenly you get ranked, right? And Google's been trying to keep up with that, and it's been an ongoing battle. And eventually it's come to the point where now so many people are focused on doing just that, optimizing whatever their content is, that you end up finding the content that we see generally comes from people who are really good at SEO and don't necessarily have the quality that we're looking
right.
for when it comes to the actual content. That is a frustrating thing for me. When I go, whether it's a Google search, YouTube search, if it's trending on Twitter, whatever it is, if someone puts enough effort into it, they can get basically garbage in front of you because they figured out how to rank it well. So to me, that is a huge source of frustration, because there's lots of great content out there who, like you said, they just don't have time to put all their energy into SEO. It's like, if you make good content, we need an algorithm that figures out, hey, this is great content, people like it, put that at the top of the list, right?
And that is definitely just the case. Like it's very frustrating to put hours and hours, like you and I were saying, like once you filmed and edited and then uploaded your video, that's when you go to work. Like you start putting in your tags, you go to your website, you go to your email list, maybe you go to upload your podcast to all these different places, and you start actually doing the work to get your video out there. And what's frustrating is you go through those hours and hours just to get it uploaded and shared across all these networks, and you just get maybe a couple hundred views, and yet someone who doesn't have as good as a quality content of video or anything like that gets thousands or millions of views, and it's actually not that good, but just because they put more work into SEO and stuff like that. And that's what's frustrating. And what's even more frustrating actually is that there aren't actually a lot of great YouTube alternatives at this point. So we are kind of just stuck with YouTube as creators, and there's workarounds. You can maybe set up a Patreon page or do something similar to that and maybe get sponsored. But even the sponsorship on YouTube is only available to specific channels out there, generally ones that are already pretty big, which doesn't necessarily make sense to me because if they're already big, they're making money. They don't necessarily need to be sponsored. But I don't know. It's tough because there aren't great YouTube alternatives. I mean, Twitch is out there, but it's very heavily focused on gaming and being live. So you don't really upload videos there. So yeah, I mean, it's tough, but I think for now, the time being, you just kind of go with it and people will adjust to the algorithm, and who knows, something else will spike and we'll get a new feature that'll help younger, smaller creators.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. And because you mentioned it, I got to say, I have been experimenting with Twitch recently.
Mm.
And I got to tell you, man, whoever designed the UI on that thing, what are you doing? I am like,
know, man.
how do I set this up? Where is this option? There's 3 different settings, which I practically gave up. And we seriously sat here for like an hour trying to figure out how this thing works. That thing needs a complete overhaul.
Definitely.
It looks like a 4-year-old built it. I don't know. I know it's popular for gaming. I understand that it works. I love YouTube, but yes, we want to see alternatives and competition in the marketplace. That's what makes things great. But I got to tell you, hands down, right now, YouTube has the functionality, and there's nothing close to it, right? There's just nothing that works the way that YouTube does, and it's been here forever. So that's going to be a tough one. But yeah, and getting back to the SEO just briefly here, this is another, and please don't look this up because it's not going to be true. I'm just saying, I'm giving an example of how this could work. But you could almost go to Google and punch in, what is 2 plus 2? And the entire above the fold results are going to take you to a page that gives you 12 paragraphs about the history of mathematics before it actually gets to the answer. And this is all part of that algorithmic challenge where people say, okay, your article has to be this long, it has to have this many keywords in it, blah, 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 blah. I don't want you to tell me a story about what I'm looking for. I want to know put that in the first paragraph. And I do fault Google to an extent on this, because if you put that valuable information within the top beginning of the page, what happens is the bounce rate goes through the roof, because people land on your site, they find what they want, and they're done. And that's what we want as users, but that penalizes them because people aren't spending enough time on their website. Right. I know it's challenging to make this work, but come on, guys. If I go to a website, I found what I want immediately, well done, thank you. But that's not what we get a lot of the time.
I know. I think it is just a little annoying because we've really lost that just more pure content for a subscriber, or content for a follower. Like, if you follow me, I'm promising to guarantee quality content that you'll see, and nowadays we have to go through so many hoops just to get the people that already told us they like our content and want to see more. We have to go through all these hoops and processes just to get it out there and in front of them. And maybe we'll get 5% of our viewership from our subscribers or something like that. And it's tough. But I see we have an old friend in my chat, JK Tech. It's good to see you, buddy. It's been a while. But I think we'll end it up. We've got a couple more minutes here. Last question maybe is, what is one piece of tech that you could not do without? This could be a brand, a software, piece of hardware. What is one thing that you would recommend to other people?
One piece of tech, like outside of the obvious, like beyond phones, or
Sure, yeah. I mean, it could be a phone if that's what you want.
Oh boy, let's see. Here's a funny thing: is I'm sitting here not using it for a specific reason, but I got to tell you, I am such a huge fan of wireless everything. Okay, so can I give you two? Can I give you two?
Yeah, that's fine.
2 things. 2 things that I can't live without. One, my wireless charging mats that I have on every single desktop, nightstand, in my car, wherever I go. Time to charge the phone. Phone is charging.
Awesome.
Ready to go, pick it up. So to me, and I know that I am in the minority here, because a lot of people go, oh yeah, just plug your phone in. I don't like that. To me, just setting it down, set it, forget it, walk away, pick it up when you're done. That would be number one. And number 2 is my Bluetooth headset, which I have tons and tons. And yes, I did complain about the removal of the headset jack, but I got to tell you, I've been a Bluetooth fan since, this is like mid 2000 stuff. I just happen to have these laying around. I've got this one over here. I am Bluetooth everything. My friends joke with me because I literally will not accept a phone call until I can get a Bluetooth headset to put in, because I can't get anything done like this, you know? Speakerphone, we know why speakerphone sucks, right? A number of reasons. But Bluetooth connectivity and wireless charging, I would say Bluetooth probably would be my number one. If I didn't have that, if I couldn't walk around freely and be using my hands for other important things while I'm talking, then I can't talk to you. Isn't that crazy? Right. But it's true.
That's a good choice. I definitely think there is a new trend with wireless stuff, is with the removal of the ports and laptops and the iPhones now. It's definitely much more popular. I was even looking at getting a pair of AirPods just because of the convenience of it. I mean, you get hands-free, there's no cables, it has its own case that charges it. It's so much easier to use. And wireless charging is awesome. I would love that it's been incorporated into the latest iPhones, because that's what I have in 8 Plus. So being able to have that and just throw it on a charging pad is so nice. But that's a good choice. Well, I think that's pretty much it for this stream. If you guys have any questions, be sure to drop it in the chat in the last few minutes here, or you can drop a comment and we'll get to it after the stream has been uploaded. But there are a couple events we want to just let you know about. Go Cell Phone Repair. Mike does have a couple of streams that he does each week. You stream on Monday and Thursdays. Is that correct?
Yeah, so you're East Coast, so I want to say that my Monday stream, which is 2 p.m. Pacific, would be 5 p.m. for anyone in your time zone. And then on Thursday evening, as we did last week or week before, it is 6 p.m. Pacific, so 9 p.m. Eastern time. And we just hang out and talk tech. So latest tech news. We've got a lot of technicians who do this stuff hands-on, who join us. So a lot of times if people walk, they come in and say, hey, I got a question about this. A lot of times the chat is very helpful. We have a lot of smart people there hanging out with us. So yeah, if anyone wants to join, if you don't mind, or actually we'll have a link down here later, right?
We'll have all the links to Mike's social network as well as YouTube, so you can check out all those streams there. But yeah, so that's been it for this stream. Again, drop your questions down below. We'll definitely get to it. And thanks for watching. Thanks for being on this stream, Mike. It's been so much fun having you here.
Cool. Thanks for inviting me, man. I'm always down to talk tech. So
definitely. Well, thanks so much, guys, and we'll see you in the next one.